For those of you who don't know me, my name's Warren Hartley. I'm also part of the team that helps make Open Table happen. And thank you, Miranda, for the invitation to share some thoughts tonight. You may recognise these words from a song. Words, words, words. I am so sick of words. I get words all day through. First from him and now from you. Is that all you blighters can do? And these are the immortal words of Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady. And they've been ringing through my head for weeks now as I've been putting this service together. So many words, so many inadequate words. Generally speaking, I wrestle with words, and I wrestle with my frequently vain attempts to share what's on my mind and what's in my heart. And these half-formed ideas tend to fall out and sit there taunting me with their inadequacy. And in some ways, this Ash Wednesday service is my sermon. Each word in the order of service has been carefully weighed, considered, placed, and they're not enough, not quite right. But it's kind of hopefully thrown out, a bit like a spider's web, to catch meaning and to convey a hope, a glimpse of something more. Now, words do tell stories, and the stories we hear and tell ourselves quite literally shape our world. As humans, we seem to understand the world through story. And to me, as a non-mathematician, huge areas of mathematics, even physics, seem to be based on axioms, assumptions, stories, dare I say, on which are then built more stories and more understandings and more assumptions. And so if a foundation, an axiom or a foundational story on which so many others stand shifts, that cascade runs through the entire web of connections that the story is built upon. So it's story upon story, and you change the foundations and it ripples all its way through. Now, a foundational story can and does change. Look at axioms in mathematics and physics. But I tell you what, it takes great courage and willingness to be open to doubt, to be uncomfortable, and it can feel a little bit like falling apart when all our earlier assumptions went by. So stories can liberate us, or sometimes they can even imprison us if we hold on to them too strongly. And they do that by shaping the way we see our world, the way we see ourselves, and the way we see other people. Now, words and images within Ash Wednesday traditional services that jump out at me. And they tend to talk about not good enough, evil, sinful, Lord have mercy, not worthy, have mercy, have mercy, have mercy. Worthy words, and words that we need. But I sometimes ask questions. Is this a story that liberates, imprisons, or something else? Now, a gospel story is probably somewhat problematic in many ways. It is one of the two set texts for Ash Wednesday, and it is so very easy to read this and hear this story as it's often presented. The woman did wrong. She'd sinned. And Jesus was the good guy. He forgave her sin, telling her to go off and not do it anymore. And then the same applies to us. I want to suggest, if I may, that this is perhaps a somewhat naive and simplistic reading of a story that is far more subversive. The story raises so many questions for me. Where was the other party in this tryst, for example? Presumably a bloke. Why wasn't she dragged out? Why was she the only one brought out to the crowd to be mocked? Why did they slink away like that? What was it Jesus wrote in the dust? I'd love to know. There is so much more going on in this story, including a rather obvious deep misogyny. Several commentators, as I was reading up, speculate that the woman was probably naked, dragged from her bed to deepen her shame in front of the crowds, and was being used as a pawn in a game. What is remarkable, though, about Jesus is that he saw through it. And though he was formed by the same culture, the same stories, the same religious stories, he responds very, very differently. He saw beyond the petty games and the manipulative use of women to prop up fragile male egos. Only the men could stone. It is like the crowds were carrying a mirror, each turned towards the cowering woman to convince her of her shame, attempting to shame Jesus into affirming their self-righteousness. Jesus instead turns the mirror around so that the crowds see themselves and they don't like what they see. Reading the story as one of an individual wrong is easy because it's about someone else's behaviour. And we don't have to look at our own. I'm not like her. Aren't I good? This story isn't about individual wrongdoing at all. The story is far more about how we as communities, as the crowds, operate, and often creating circumstances of grave injustice. Christianity has for a long time focused on individual piety. Just keep your nose clean and you'll get to heaven. It becomes all about the individual and the next life. I find it interesting that some of our leaders bemoan the rise of individualism, and yet perhaps the stories we've been telling for the last few hundred years have actually given rise to it. And it leaves unexamined and unchallenged the systems and societies which oppress and do evil. Yes, our individual actions absolutely contribute, but focusing solely on individual actions is an attempt firstly to let ourselves off the hook from the larger work of cultural change, but also a way to use shame to keep us quiet. Who in power wants individuals agitating for systemic change when it's those very systems that give them the power and money? You're likely to find yourself dragged out naked into the street to keep you quiet. I began to wonder if perhaps the woman in the story had slept with someone in power, and it was he who needed protecting, so she needed shaming. Can you see the subversive nature of how we use power? I don't think we've evolved terribly much as a society, but even beyond the Roman circuses, where instead of gladiators, today we dress ours in bikinis or Speedos and stick them on Love Island, or out in the Australian jungle, and then bay for their blood. Is it really much different? I'm not sure it is. But it's tough to break through the binding stories and take up perhaps the very small amount of power that is within our grasp and then proceed to walk against the flow. It costs way beyond keeping our nose clean. But I think that's what the Jesus story calls us to do. Now, Richard Rohr often says, most of my preaching is really preaching to myself. And that is certainly true for me. I agonise over what difference I can or do make. Can my words or actions make any difference at all? I'm not sure I can even manage it for the ones I say I love. I don't know about you, but I feel so inadequate. Is it all just a bit too hard? So what difference can Ash Wednesday make in this yearly sharing of stories and words, ritual, and the occasional ancient problematic story? I think our actions and the traditions of Ash Wednesday can help us see ourselves and our world more accurately. It is a chance to acknowledge life isn't all wonderful or rosy, nor are we, and that's okay. We are human after all. We can't get it right all the time. We can't figure it all out. We are limited. We are finite. We are mortal. We screw it up, individually and corporately. But that isn't the end of the story. This obvious yet elusive realisation may just become our path of liberation. Carl Rogers was a famous psychotherapist in the 20th century. And he said in an interview, "One way of putting this is that I feel I have become more adequate in letting myself be what I am. It becomes easier for me to accept myself as a decidedly imperfect person who by no means functions at all times in the way in which I would like to function." This must seem to some like a very strange direction to move. It seems to me to have value because the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I change. Hear those words again. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I change. I think this can also be true of institutions, communities, and even nations. If we can accept ourselves as we are, honestly and truly, not with the rosy glasses on, then perhaps we can change. This isn't a servile, we're not worthy, but an honest acceptance of what it means to be human and our history. So Ash Wednesday, therefore, I think, can be a celebration of what it means to be human. Our limits, our mortality, but also our ability to reach beyond that. Instead of blindly accepting stories from our churches or our culture that we aren't beautiful enough, good enough, rich enough, strong enough, smart enough, fashionable enough, straight enough, gay enough, feminine enough, masculine enough, holy enough, the list goes on and on and on. But if we can accept ourselves just as we are, together, maybe we can change things. So why then glitter and ash? Now, glitter has been part of queer or LGBTQIA culture for a long time and is a symbolic rejection of the story told of us and to us that we are less than. Many LGBTQIA people have felt like that woman figuratively and sometimes literally dragged out into the street to be an object of shame and or violence to satisfy the crowds. But this isn't unique to our experience alone, though. Just look around us today, migrants, asylum seekers, people with mental health issues. Look at the stories in our media in the recent months about trans folk. All of this is a collective avoiding the harder work of seeing ourselves as we really are. Now, Liz Edman is an American priest, and she founded this idea of Glitter+Ash a few years back. And where she got the idea from, and I quote her, "I had the image of the glitter from a drag queen's makeup falling to the floor, being swept up with the dust as that same drag queen walks home on darkened streets, risking life and limb by being his full self in view of others. This courage, this embrace of objection, this determination to find joy while making queerness and beauty visible, all of this is the history and the conviction that I hoped we would smear on our foreheads for the world to see." So, tonight, this Ash Wednesday, we are going to be smeared with ash and glitter. A reminder that yes, we are mortal, we are finite, and in the glint of the glitter, we reflect our value, our inherent dignity and beauty for all the world to see. It is a defiant act of resistance that I am not what others say that I am. And I hope that I can say it with conviction one day, that I am human, a beloved child of God, flawed, finite, and a little bit fabulous. So I would like to invite you to sashay, mince, walk, stomp, stride, glide, or roll your way on. Display your mortality, your mixed-upness, and your magnificence for all to see. And together, we might just change our world. Amen.